Alright, welcome back. This video will be the final video for our tutorials on the Photoshop output files and formats, video number 2 for that. And we are going to finish off by looking at different output formats and their uses. So let's get started. So we finished off everything. Rechecking our file was what we did in our last video to make sure everything looked good and we were ready for making final output files. So let's look at some of the file formats that we're going to be outputting to, and then I want to also talk about some of the options you can pursue or explore on your own as far as using different formats for different things you might want them for. So let's go to File, and we're going to go to File, and we're going to go to Save As. Okay, you should get a pop-up dialog window like this. If you're on a Mac and it looks like this is the minimized window that Mac offers you. If you don't want it minimized, you can click this little down arrow across from Save As, and it will open up additional save menu options for you to work with. Now, in terms of saving in Photoshop, there are tons of formats that you can save and output. And each of them have different pros and cons and different good uses. Our most basic format that we've been working with is something called the Photoshop format, which creates what's called a PSD file, which is what we've been working with as our master file that stores all of our layer information and filters and editing that we've been doing. The Photoshop format inside of the Photoshop software is also considered the native file format, so that's the format that it's used to and is actually designed to work 100% with the software. So that's Photoshop, and that's great for exchanging, keeping edits that you want to keep revisiting time and again. Highly recommend using that format for this purpose. And that's also one of the turn-in formats that you'll be using for your final work. If you click on Format for Photoshop, you should notice there's a long list here of other options that you can use. Some of the other ones I want to highlight, I'm not going to go through each of these, but just a few to name that you can create with this. The other basic that we'll be dealing with is the JPEG or JPEG format. Many of you are probably familiar with this. This is a common format for digital picture files that you can get out of your digital camera or out of your phone, or that you might download from online. It is a highly common format used for that. The definition for JPEG is actually Joint Photographic Experts Group. And it was a format developed early on when the internet started becoming sort of a new available technology, as a way for sending and making images available for anyone. And so it's a relatively small file format. It does make images compact, but it does compress them, which means the quality goes down slightly in order to make a small file that still looks decent at a certain size. It's also the most common for printing from, oddly enough. So if you ever wanted to make a format for printing, JPEG is the one to go with. Other formats you might want to be aware of, like there's Photoshop PDF. So you can also make PDF exchange documents inside here that you may be wanting to add to a PDF file that you might be working on, or a document you want to exchange. PDF is great. That is again, sort of a universal exchange format developed by Adobe. There's some other common ones, like PNG is great if you're posting it on a website, although most commonly PNG file formats are used with graphics. Simple graphics, which is something we'll visit in our next project when we use Adobe Illustrator. And then there's some other scattered formats here. The last one is the TIFF, T-I-F-F, or Tagged Image File Format. And that one is really great if you want like an archival type file that has a high bit save level that you can still print. You can't really print directly from a Photoshop file typically, but you can print from a TIFF or a JPEG. So if you need a file that's more high quality than JPEG that a printer will accept, if they accept TIFF, I would try to use the TIFF instead. Much more color quality and a higher level of quality. They also will save layer information, oddly enough. Okay, So we have our Photoshop file already saved and ready. What we're also going to save is our JPEG, so let's select that. All right, so we have our JPEG selected. You may notice there are checkboxes listed below. Most of these we don't need to worry about. When you make a JPEG, all of your layer information gets flattened into one single flat layer, which is great for saving on file size. Again, you don't get access to your layers again in a JPEG format file, but the good news is that it just makes a copy, so it won't save over your original file. It can't do that because it's a separate format. So you're actually pretty safe right now with that part. It will also put into your file something called an embedded color profile. The color profile, if you don't recall from early on in this project, the color profile is what is used to help redisplay your colors correctly on different systems. So this is the most common, sRGB. It's actually the most common for most printing when you're sending directly to the printer. There's also one that's called CMYK, and sometimes there are certain printers or four-color printers or offset printing systems that prefer to use that format for proper color rendition. sRGB is also good for direct-to-screen or digital screen showing, so if you display it on a website, you would want sRGB, as well as editing on a monitor like you're doing right now. That is the most efficient method and format to use. To give you a little bit more detail on where you can find ways to change color profile, let me just cancel this for a minute. But come up here to Edit from your top Photoshop menu and slide all the way down, and you'll find options for color settings, assigning a profile, and converting to a profile. So if you look under color settings first, this is what is set up in the document currently. So general settings for North America. Workspaces, this is what we have set for sRGB and CMYK. Color management, all of this is all pretty much set up for us on the front end. Nothing you really need to change here. What you may want to look at if you go back and edit is you can look at converting your image format to a profile or assigning it a profile. Changing the document profile can affect the appearance of layers. That's true. So you can still say OK. Now we're not changing it, we're just looking at what we have currently set inside the system. So right now it says working profile RGB, which is what we want. You can, of course, change it to a different one, like you can use a different profile from the long list over here while you're editing. Notice that when I switch between these two, that the color quality immediately changes in the background. So this gives you a visual idea of how different color is stored between these two formats, or how it reads color from the original pixel data. So sRGB is actually a much smaller color space and doesn't have as much color to use, and then Adobe RGB 98 has much more to use. Now there are many formats here that they give you lots of options. Even ProPhoto is even a higher color rendition, especially for editing. There aren't many printers that I know of that can use this yet, but it is great for doing edits inside of. So I highly recommend using that if you want to just do general editing on an image. But when you're done with that stage, you do need to pick a profile that you're going to send it out to, or a final color profile depending on where you're going to display it. So for our purposes, we're only viewing it on the web and through Blackboard. So working sRGB is fine. I'll just say cancel for now. So let's go back to File and Save As, and let's make our first extra format, which is going to be JPEG. And make sure you're saving it into your main folder with your other file, PSD. Say Save. You'll get a pop-up for JPEG saving. One of them you should be aware of right here is the quality level. Always make sure that the quality slider is pulled all the way to large file so that you get the largest file format with the least amount of compression. That's the only thing we need to change in here. They do give you other format options for like adjusting the baseline, the way it shows the pixels in the screen, but you really don't need to mess with this. Leave it at baseline standard and we'll say OK. And you will get a separate image saved, so I'm just going to go visit where my image is saved to. See if I can find it. Here we go. So here's my JPEG, and here's my PSD. that I've been working on. So my PSD file is actually 250 megabytes, and my JPEG is only 2.4. So a fraction of that original PSD file size is what it makes. Still the same pixel dimensions, but again, it's a fraction of the size. And this JPEG is more suitable for printing and for making for that purpose. And that's the other format that you need for turning in with your work, just to show that you can make the two different formats appropriately. All right. And again, when working with going to print, if you do decide to print a photograph from Photoshop, it's good to, in my opinion, it's good to sometimes check to make sure that you are working with your printer, the person you're going to send it to print. Make sure you're getting the right profile that you're going to send it with. So make sure that you assign the correct profile to your image according to what the printer you're sending it to will use. You may want to call ahead and find out what that is. Also, make sure that they aren't doing automatic adjustments to your image, like adding automatic contrast adjustments or color changes. Those are terrible. And they usually end up being more washed out or more dark or too bright. So watch for those things. Sometimes it's good to print more than one if you can, or print a test copy that has that maybe is a smaller image. But those are some things to keep in mind if you decide to print your image. Sometimes you have to make it a little brighter. It just depends. But those are some things to think about when sending your work out. That concludes everything that we're going to do with Project 1 as far as preparing your work. All you need to do now is get ready to save your work into Blackboard and submit it through the various places for file submission and for critique. So make sure you have those file formats handy and all of your other remaining files for the project. And always check the requirements back in the introductory section or in the critiquing section. All right. Great work, and I look forward to seeing your finished works. Take care.